Hi, Charles of Booksage here, and this is my Moonchild book tag. Moonchild book tag is a tag created by Crescent Moon Reads, and I was tagged by MorgyyReads to do this. So I'm going to dive right in. This is my first time doing a book tag. So question number 1 is Full Moon, book that has supernatural creatures in it. And I decided to go with Patricia Keneally's Keltiad series. It is a science fantasy series where basically you have the whole Celtic people who were, in our world, basically destroyed by the Romans and Caesar and them. And in this universe, the Celtic people were more advanced, and they basically built spaceships and left Earth and went seeking a new solar system where they could live. And this is about Earth, thousands of years later, discovering the Celtic Empire out there among the stars, and then getting caught up in all their events that are going on there because they are being threatened by two different empires. And really, really cool story. So it has all of the Celtic myths, legends, all those creatures and everything are all present in here. You have the Sidhe, they're sort of Celtic version of fairies, elves that you see in a lot of Irish and Scottish fairy tales and folk tales. But very, very cool series. This is the first of a trilogy. There's also a second trilogy that's a prequel, which is their world's Arthurian story, their Arthur and what had happened to him. So among my favorites, just a great, great series. I thoroughly enjoyed when I first read this, which was quite a while ago. Okay, number 2, Starry Night, book that has a beautiful starry cover. So I am going with The Song of Unmaking from Caitlin Brennan. And this is book 2 of the White Magic series. And Caitlin Brennan is actually Judith Tarr, and this is a pen name she writes under when she writes this kind of story. And this deals with these horses live up on what's known as the mountain, and they are believed to be their gods who run on Earth, on the world, in horse form. And there are boys, when they reach a certain age, who receive the calling and are called up to the mountain to become part of this society and take care of these horses, their gods, and learn magic and different things. And the story starts off with a young woman who hears that call and defies all tradition to try to go and become a member of them. And this is actually the second book in the trilogy. And as you can see, it's got the whole stars up there, and it continues around the back with more stars and the moon. And really, really interesting series. If you like horses and magic and all those things, I definitely give that a recommend. And there goes my headphones. Luckily, it didn't turn off the power strip and kill my video and computer. Okay, number 3, Out of This World, favorite sci-fi book. I am going with, of course, a book I seem to mention in every other video I do, Samuel R. Delany's Dahlgren, which is probably my favorite science fiction book of all time. It's a post-apocalyptic dystopian book where it says the world has gone mad. So the sun has grown deadly, the world has gone mad, society has perished, savagery rules over all. All that was known is over, all that was familiar is strange and terrible today and yesterday collide with tomorrow. In these dying days of Earth, a young drifter enters the city. And it's about this kid who doesn't even know his name, who enters what I think is supposed to be post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. And it is just an absolute fascinating story. The strangest book I've ever read, but this is one of those books that you just get completely immersed in. You will, you lose yourself in this story because it's so detailed and so intricate and so fascinating. You really get sucked right in to this. So you're going to need time for this book. It's pretty long, and it's a bit of a challenging read as well, especially in the back because there's multiple books within books, and they're printed in the sides. And anyway, I've mentioned this many, many times in my books. Probably my favorite. Samuel R. Delany, if you have not read him, one of the best genre fiction authors there are. Without a doubt, he's an automatic buy for me. Okay, number 4, Creature of the Night. And this one is Thriller with a Killer. Now, there are a lot of books I could have gone with. There are a lot of Stephen King books I could have gone with. And I did go with the Stephen King book. And this one I'm going with is The Dark Half. This one definitely has a killer in it. It's pretty brutal. It's very fast-paced. The main premise is there's an author. He writes these other set of stories under a pen name. His pen name is outed as who he really is. So he decides to kill off his pseudonym and has like a fake ceremony to bury the fake writer that he pretended to be. And in Stephen King's style, that fake writer comes to life and decides to hunt down and kill everyone the main writer knows, and I'm assuming try to take over his life in his place. And it's brutal and vicious, and if this were made into a movie, this would be like a slasher fic. So this one just seemed to really, really fit the bill, because there's a much higher death count than normal in this book for when I normally read Stephen King. Because Stephen King deals a lot more with the supernatural, and it's a slow burn build up in a lot of his books. And this one is pretty ruthless. Okay, number 5, The Moon Controls the Tides. And a book that deals with water. And that could be water, whether it's a setting, powers, whatever. Anyway. And I am going with Stephen R. Donaldson's The One Tree. This is book 2 of the Second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. I've also mentioned this series at least once, if not more. And this particular book deals with the main characters join up with a seafaring giants on the Starfarer's Gem. So a lot of the book takes place at sea. The first 5 books prior to this all take place on the land. And this is the first one where they leave the land and are out at sea. And they're going on a quest to find the one tree, which their staff of law was carved from the one tree. So the main character, Thomas Covenant, is on a quest to try to find that one tree. And nobody really knows where it's located. So it's their journey and all the different places they go and people they meet and dangers they face while they're seeking the one tree. So it's a nice change of pace for the series, because it's a completely new setting where you're taken away from the mainland for the first time. And of course, and top 3 all-time favorite fantasy series for me. Cool. So, number 6 already. Daughters of the Moon. And we are going to go with, and this is books that feature some serious girl power friendship. So I am going to go with an interesting take on fairy tales by Jim C. Hines, and that is the Stepsister Scheme. Now, this is a really fun read. The Stepsister Scheme is basically, it's like, starts the day after Cinderella is married to the prince. And this is Danielle, Talia, and Snow, who are actually Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White. And the prince is kidnapped by one of the stepsisters, and they go on a journey. They undertake it to themselves to try to go and rescue the prince. So it takes that whole fairy tale motif and flips it on its head, where it's the prince that's captured and needs to be rescued. And these books are a lot of fun. He delves into the darker side of like the original versions of a lot of their stories, so it can get a little heavy as well. And this is actually the first of 4 books. There's this one. There's The Mermaid's Madness. Red Hood's Revenge, where the Red Hood is an assassin hunting Talia, the Sleeping Beauty. And The Snow Queen's Shadow. And I still have to actually finish reading this series, but these are a lot of fun, and I like it because it's a completely different take, where you have like what these legends and fairy tales really were about, and then him like telling you and what happened to them afterwards. And these are all kind of rollicking adventures, but still with some pretty serious themes and involved. Because a lot of the original stories were pretty dark. All the Disney versions are completely different. Okay, number 7. Spaceship, Your OTP Friends. Now I'm doing 2 different sets here. I'm doing one that's friendship, and then I'm doing another one that are lovers. And the first one is the friendship one. And again, another series that I've mentioned before, because I've been highlighting a lot of my favorites in a lot of the first few videos I've been making, and that is Moraine and Vadin al-Vadin from The Hall of the Mountain King, which is volume 1 of the Avarian Rising trilogy. Moraine, and that's him here, he shows up one day at the kingdom of Rhiannon, claiming to be the old king's grandson, and that his mother was the king's daughter, and his father is the Avarian, the sun god himself. And Vadin is a guard, a brand new guard at the castle, at the front gates, and who ends up escorting Moraine to the king, and then the king assigns Vadin to be Moraine's bodyguard. And Vadin pretty much hates his guts. He doesn't like him. He's an interloper. He doesn't trust him. And it's besides the main plot line of Moraine proving who he is and trying to prove who he is and proving himself being worthy of becoming the king eventually, you have this story between Moraine and Vadin and the friendship that eventually grows. And this is the first of a trilogy, so you get to see their friendship over an extended period of time. And one of my favorite parts of the trilogy is the friendship between these two characters that develops. These are two men who come to deeply love each other as brothers. And one of my favorite buddy friendships in fantasy stories. And Judith Tarr is just a great writer. And the Caitlin Brennan book with the horses, this is the actual same author, Judith Tarr. This is what she writes under as well. Okay, next up is I forgot the second half of my OTP. And those are the lovers, and that is Sinead, the Sunrunner Witch, and Rohan, the Desert Prince. And Melanie Ron's Sunrunner series, its 2 trilogies, are, again, just among my favorite fantasy trilogies, my favorite fantasy stories. This is the very first one. It starts off with Rohan is a very young prince, inherits the Desert princedom. And Sinead is trained as a sunrunner, which is the witches. They can weave sunlight, and they can do all sorts of things. It's their magic, and they can communicate. The sunrunners are kind of all trained at the Goddess Keep, and they are sort of neutral. And each lord has a sunrunner at court because they can weave sunlight and communicate back and forth with each other in the sunlight. So it's a great means of communication. But they stay neutral. They don't use their power to attack people. They're forbidden to kill. They can only use their magic against someone else to protect to save their own lives. So there's a lot of those safeguards built in. Otherwise, people would fear their power. And Sinead leaves the Goddess Keep because she's been promised in marriage to Rohan, which is a very controversial pairing because she's now going to become the lady of the Desert Princedom, which is unheard of for a Faradi, a sunrunner, to wield political power. So, and these two are personality-wise are completely different from each other. Rohan is a thinker. He plots out. He studies. He takes intricate plans and slowly builds them and works them. And Sinead is kind of a firebrand. She's a very fly by the seat of her pants, passionate, fierce person. And they make for a very formidable couple once they come together and learn each other and become friends and then lovers and in love, and their whole journey of political power and magic. And it's just an awesome series. And there's dragons and all sorts of stuff. And they're one of my absolute favorite couples because they're just so different personality wise, but they work so well together as people. And just great stories. Lots of big, emotional, impactful stuff from Melanie Ron. All right, now we're moving on to number 8, and that's Waxes and Wanes, books that played with your emotions. Now, I'm going to do a honorable mention first, and that is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, which to me is one of the greatest books I've ever read. It is a very powerful, emotional, it's a short story book, but it's a very powerful book. And I just wanted to mention that because there are very few books that have just made me break down and weep, and that's one of them. We were actually reading that in school, a chapter a day, and me being who I am, I went home and just read the whole book that night. And I'm glad I did, because at the end, I was a mess. And that wouldn't have been something I would have wanted to do in like 6th grade or whatever it was when we read it. But the book I'm going with is Dragon's Dawn from Anne McCaffrey. And this is part of her Dragon Riders of Pern series. And I'm going with this because this was published well into the series, and it's a prequel of when humans first came to Pern and set up a colony and started populating it. And I would not recommend reading this first, even though timeline of the events on Pern, this happens first. But I would not recommend reading it first, because there's a lot of things in here that you begin to discover in the series as the series goes along. And when the story gets to the point where, okay, you need to know about their origin, that's when this was written and published. And I think it works better if you keep this to be read when it was in the order of publication. And I think it adds a lot to the story when you as the reader know what's coming and the characters don't. It's a different kind of tension for you, because you don't, instead of you not knowing along with them, and then these horrible things happen, it's a surprise, but knowing that it's coming adds this layer of dread and tension as you're reading this book. And it's really, it's a really, really well-written book, one of her best in the series, because you watch them deal with tragedy and then use their technology and their brains and their minds to come up with long-term, what they hope will eventually be solutions. And this is another book that there's a scene in here that just absolutely just ripped my heart out, and I was a total wreck the first time I read this. So this is, again, these were the first 2 books that came to mind. And Of Mice and Men is just one of the greatest books ever written, so I could not pass up the opportunity to mention it. But this would be my, and this is, again, science fantasy series. It's a melding of science fiction and fantasy. Okay. Next up is Music of the Night. And I am actually going with another Dragon Riders of Pern book. And this is the Harper Hall trilogy of Pern, the Harper Hall of Pern. And this is 3 books that deal with Menely and Pimer, who are 2 young kids who end up becoming part of the Harper Hall, where they're trained in music. Harpers are like sort of bards. They tell tales, they tell stories, they learn the history, they help the lords talk to the people and explain what's going on through their music. And it's their story of how these 2, who are characters in the original first trilogy, this is sort of a companion trilogy that goes along with it. So you see a lot more of what they were up to in the events of that first trilogy. So, because they were up to a lot, but they don't get the center stage because other characters are the main characters of the main trilogy. And I absolutely love this trilogy. Menely here is one of my all-time favorite fantasy characters in literature. She's very high up on my list of all-time favorites. She's really, really cool. And Pimer is kind of a trip as well. He's a lot of fun. And he manages to get himself in every heap of trouble you can picture. And he's really good at getting himself out of it without getting killed. And Menely, for her, it's overcoming her challenges and her past and her fears, and being able to recognize the gift she has, because she doesn't really see it when she's younger, because it's sort of driven out of her by her being told that she's not allowed, not worthy, not able to do it. So it's a lot of it of her as a coming of age story, and her working through that and kind of discovering herself as a person and her gifts. And music plays such a big part in the series. The Harpers are like a foundational piece of their society. And I just want to go back and reread all the Pern books now because it's been a long time since I've read them. And here we go, number 10. We got 2 more to go. After Hours, book that has the word night in the title. And I am going to mention a book that I do not own, I have not read, and has not even been published yet. But it is about to be published in, I think, just a couple of weeks. And that is Jen Campbell's The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. And that is a collection of short stories. It has kind of a fantasy folk fairy tale kind of element from the little I've heard her talk about it and read from it. If you go to her BookTube page, her YouTube page, she reads like I think the first paragraph or first page. She's one of my favorite booktubers. She's just got a great channel with so much great content. And it's not all just her stuff that she writes. A lot of it is just her thoughts on writing and stories. And she's a really, really good channel to follow. I will link her channel down below. And because I forgot to mention, I will also obviously link Crescent Moon Reads and MorgyyReads down below. And now we come to the final question. And that is Crescent Moon, the book that features a goddess or gods, or god or goddesses. And I am going to go with Louise Cooper's The Time Master Trilogy. Louise Cooper is another author who might not be all that well known. She's actually no longer living. She died at a pretty young age, I think. But this deals with the gods of order and chaos. And at the blurb on the back of the first book here is, down all the ages, the twin powers of order and chaos have been locked in an eternal struggle for control of the worlds of men. Somewhere beyond the realms we know, in a time when order has triumphed, a child is born, a nameless outcast destined to restore the terrible balance. This is the tale of his initiation. And it is basically a story of that, where you have this kid who ends up being dropped off at this school of magic, of mages, and he exhibits extraordinary power, and his whole story of learning how to wield it and what it is. And then you discover as the story goes on that there's a chess match being played by order and chaos. Order's trying to stay dominant and reign supreme, and chaos is trying to, at the very least, get back up to order's level. And many of the chaos want to just take over themselves. And this is the first book. The Outcast is the second book, and just absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous covers. And The Master is the third book. And one of my favorite stories. I lost count of how many times I've read these. But again, just absolutely beautiful, beautiful covers. The covers alone were what first made me pay attention to it. And then luckily, the story was just as good, if not even better, than the covers themselves. Louise Cooper, she's pretty high up there on the list of authors I own the most books of. I think I've got about 16 of her books. Wonderful, wonderful writer. Pretty much fantasy. There's a second trilogy that takes place in this same world that's also really good. For me, not as enjoyable as this original series, but that's only because this was the original one and it introduced me to this whole world and story. But yes, if you can find her books, I think they're probably mostly only available on ebook the last time I checked, but it's been a little while since I've looked. I'd highly recommend reading hers. She has another series, I think it's Inferno, which is, I think it's a 7-book series where she takes the Pandora's box kind of story and uses that, where a young girl opens up this box forbidden and it releases all these demons. And then she is basically tasked with hunting them down. And she's pretty much not allowed to do anything else and can never have her regular life back until she accomplishes this. And she has a wolf who can sort of talk, but struggles to speak, who's her companion in this whole journey to try to redeem herself and basically stop all these demons she let out into the world. Really fun, really cool series. And that's pretty much it. I want to thank Crescent Moon Reads for creating this. I want to thank MorgyyReads for tagging me in this. And now I guess it's the time for me to tag somebody. And the first person I'm tagging is teabooksmagic. And the second person I'm tagging is the Bookish Porcupine. So I will link all their channels down below. Crescent Moons, Morgyy's, teabooksmagic, the Bookish Porcupine. I'll link Jen Campbell's down below. This has been pretty cool, a lot of fun. I hope I haven't been a rambling idiot doing this. This is my first time doing a book tag, so it's a new experience for me, but I quite enjoyed it. And I guess that's pretty much it. I'm going to wrap it up here. I am Charles of Sir Booksage, and I will talk to you on Twitter. I'll see you in the comments. Like and subscribe, especially if this is your first time here. I talk about a lot of the older science fiction and fantasy books, and I'm about to start getting into a lot of the newer ones. I do have my V. Schwab books back there I'm dying to get into. But until then, this is Charles of Sir Booksage. Happy reading.